In the summer heat of 1945, hundreds of exhausted Japanese soldiers shuffled through the barbed wire gates of an American prison camp. Their uniforms were torn, their faces hollow, and their eyes empty. They expected humiliation. They expected cruelty. But what awaited them inside was something they could never have imagined: hot water, soap, and towels. To men who had survived the jungles of the Pacific, this was not comfort, it was confusion. Why would the enemy, the Americans they'd been told were monsters, offer them cleanliness instead of pain? This is the story of that moment, when fear met humanity, when propaganda collapsed under the hiss of warm water, and when Japanese prisoners of war discovered that even in captivity, dignity could still exist. The first weeks of captivity were filled with tension. The air around the camp crackled with silence, the kind that comes when men are too afraid to speak. The prisoners arrived in ragged uniforms stiff with dried sweat and dust, their boots caked with the mud of long marches. The war had stripped them of everything: command, comradeship, even the illusion of victory. Now, herded through wooden gates lined with barbed wire, they entered a new kind of battlefield, one ruled not by gunfire, but by order. After registration and brief medical checks, they were led to a large wooden building. Pipes snaked along the ceiling, and rows of nozzles hung above drains embedded in the floor. It looked industrial, mechanical, foreign. Many froze where they stood. This was not a sight they knew. The American guards gestured briskly, their English sharp and impatient. Through translators and hand signals, the message was clear: strip, shower, wash. The prisoners hesitated. Fear rippled through the group. Some clutched their meager belongings. Others whispered warnings. Was this a trick? They remembered the stories their officers had told them, that capture meant torture, that Americans were barbaric, that surrender was worse than death. And now they stood beneath metal pipes, steam rising in thin curls. Could this be what they feared most? Orders came again, louder this time. Belts, boots, tunics, all removed. The prisoners stood bare and trembling, the weight of humiliation pressing down on them. Their bodies told stories of the war, scars from shrapnel, insect bites, infections that never healed. A guard handed them small bars of soap, white, foreign, with a sharp chemical scent. They clutched them tightly, as though expecting them to dissolve into poison. Then came the hiss. From the overhead pipes burst streams of hot water, not scalding, not cold, but steady and warm. The sound filled the room, echoing off the wooden walls like rain on a tin roof. At first, the men froze. They expected pain, screams, something terrible, but instead, they felt warmth. Clean, pure warmth cascading down their backs and shoulders. For the first time in months, grime peeled away. Sweat and dust melted into the drains. The soap foamed between their fingers, unfamiliar and almost magical. Some closed their eyes. Others rubbed their skin cautiously, afraid the moment might vanish. Slowly, fear gave way to silence. A silence filled not with terror, but awe. They had not felt this clean in years. When the water stopped, thick cotton towels were handed out, soft, absorbent, and impossibly white. Many of the prisoners hesitated to touch them. In their army, such fabric was rare even for officers. They dried themselves awkwardly, glancing around as though waiting for a punishment that never came. To the Americans, it was routine. To the Japanese, it felt unreal. As they returned to their barracks, the silence deepened. Men sat on wooden benches, staring at their hands, at the towels folded in their laps. The question rippled quietly through the room. Why? Why would the enemy waste hot water on prisoners? Why soap? Why towels? Why care? For men taught that surrender erased one's worth, this simple act of hygiene felt almost cruel in its kindness. Some whispered that it was a test. Others murmured darker things, that perhaps the showers were not meant for cleaning. The word gas passed from mouth to mouth, carried by rumor and fear. Few knew what had truly happened in Europe, but they had heard fragments. Stories of showers turned to death chambers. Was that what awaited them here? The American guards, puzzled by the hesitation, tried to explain through translators. The showers were mandatory, hygiene, they said, nothing more, but the concept itself was alien. In Japan, bathing was sacred, a ritual of purification. Yet in the field, war had made such rituals impossible. Soldiers bathed rarely, if ever. Soap was a luxury, water a resource too precious to waste. Now, in the hands of their enemy, they were being forced to bathe daily. To the Americans, this was efficiency, disease prevention, discipline, routine. To the Japanese, it was strange and unsettling, stripped of privacy and meaning. The camp showers were not quiet bathhouses of home. They were industrial, lined with steel and echo, a machine of cleanliness. Still, the process repeated, day after day, and slowly, something began to change. At first, every order was met with suspicion. Some prisoners barely touched the soap, others rushed through the motions. But nothing terrible followed. No punishment, no hidden cruelty. Only more showers, then came clean uniforms, fresh undergarments, lice checks, disinfectant powder. The guards were relentless, not in brutality, but in procedure. Every man must wash. Every bunk must be checked. Every blanket laundered. Weeks passed, and the changes became visible. The sores on legs began to heal. The constant itching from lice faded. The air inside the barracks grew lighter, cleaner, breathable. For the first time since the war began, many could sleep through the night without scratching or coughing. The irony was bitter. They were prisoners, yet healthier than they had been in their own army. For the American military, hygiene was not a gesture of mercy. It was discipline, as essential as rations or drills. From the perspective of camp officers, cleanliness kept disease away, preserved morale, and maintained order. Outbreaks of dysentery or typhus were threats to stability, and so every soldier or prisoner was expected to stay clean. To the prisoners, it seemed absurd at first, but soon they began to understand. Cleanliness was not softness. It was control. It was structure. It was power. One former mechanic from Yokosuka would later recall how his cough disappeared after weeks of forced bathing. A corporal who had fought on Guadalcanal remembered how his leg wounds, once festering, began to close. The showers that once humiliated them were healing them. As days turned into months, resistance faded into habit. The men lined up quietly, towels folded neatly across their arms. They scrubbed with precision, mimicking the motions of their guards. It became ritual, not of faith, but of survival. Conversations began to shift. They spoke of soap types, of which brands lathered better, of how to dry faster in the cool evening air. Small, human conversations, fragments of normal life inside barbed wire. And with that came a subtle realization. Their captors expected them to live with dignity, to maintain order, to stay clean, not as servants, but as men. It was an idea that clashed violently with what they had been taught. In the Imperial Japanese Army, endurance of filth was honor. Pain was proof of strength, but here, the enemy treated cleanliness as strength. It was discipline, not indulgence. For many, this was the first glimpse into another kind of civilization, one that prized efficiency and comfort in equal measure. The showers, in their simplicity, became a mirror. When prisoners stepped under those streams of hot water, they saw not only their reflections in puddles on the floor, but reflections of a world far more advanced than their own. If America could provide endless hot water to its captives, what must life be like for its soldiers, its citizens? This thought unsettled many. They remembered comrades dying of infections for lack of clean water. They remembered marching in filth, lice eating through seams of unwashed uniforms. To realize that their enemy had conquered such simple problems, that was a revelation. For some, it was envy. For others, respect. For all, it was unforgettable. The transformation was not just physical. It was mental, even spiritual. The men who once saw the showers as humiliation began to anticipate them. They learned to enjoy the warmth, the sensation of feeling clean. They emerged each day smelling faintly of soap instead of sweat and decay. Their wounds healed, their coughs eased, and though they rarely spoke of it aloud, they began to sense something profound, that order and care could exist without cruelty. The Americans enforced rules, yes, but within those rules lay an unexpected humanity. Inside the camp, a strange paradox formed. Defeat had led them not to degradation, but to recovery. By autumn, when cooler winds swept across the camp, the fear of the first weeks had faded. Now, during meals, the men spoke openly about their first days, laughing awkwardly about how they had trembled at the sight of the shower pipes. They compared those memories to bathhouses back home, to family evenings before the war. The smell of soap, the warmth of water, sensations long buried beneath the horrors of battle, returned to them like ghosts of peace. And in those quiet moments, they began to ask deeper questions. If the enemy cared this much for hygiene, for order, for the well-being of even prisoners, what did that say about their strength as a nation? How could a civilization that valued cleanliness so highly also build weapons of such destruction? These questions lingered, long after the water stopped running. Years later, when the war ended and the surviving prisoners returned to Japan, many carried with them an unexpected memory, not of battles, not of gunfire, but of showers. Historians who interviewed them decades later were struck by how often the detail appeared. Men who had endured jungle warfare, who had watched comrades die, spoke most vividly of the moment warm water touched their skin in an American camp, because that moment symbolized something greater than comfort. It represented a clash of worlds, between scarcity and abundance, between endurance and efficiency, between discipline through suffering and discipline through care. Some former prisoners, once home, quietly kept the habit alive. They washed daily, insisting on soap even when it was scarce. They taught their children that cleanliness was not weakness, it was strength. The lesson had taken root. The story of those camp showers is rarely told. It lacks the drama of battles or the scale of grand strategy. Yet in its simplicity lies a profound truth about war and humanity. The Japanese prisoners entered those camps expecting punishment. Instead, they encountered an idea that even in captivity, a man could be treated with structure, order, and care. The Americans, by enforcing hygiene, revealed not just a different military system, but a different philosophy of life. And for the prisoners who experienced it, the realization was transformative. They discovered that strength was not found only in endurance, but in preservation. That discipline was not merely about pain, but about respect for the body. That civilization was measured not by how one treated allies, but by how one treated enemies. In the end, the showers were more than just streams of hot water. They were symbols of contrast, of revelation, of the unexpected humanity that can emerge even amid war. For the men who stood beneath those pipes, soap in hand and fear in their hearts, the experience washed away more than dirt. It cleansed illusions, dissolving the myths they had carried into battle. When they returned home, they did not remember the enemy's cruelty. They remembered the warmth, and that warmth, both of the water and of realization, would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Because sometimes, the smallest act of civilization can leave the deepest mark on the soul.